I'd like to just focus on one other aspect of your journey with Hula, which was around your acquisition then. And I bring this up because it's not every day or not every company that ends up having a successful acquisition or a successful exit. I think every founder hopes that that'll happen one day for them. And I'd love to hear kind of your story of that acquisition and perhaps any advice that you would have to other founders who are considering in the short or medium term an acquisition, and maybe what the things that they should look out for.
Gosh, yeah, that's a really how long have we got?
Cliff Notes version.
Exactly right. Okay, noted. um, it- well, where to start? I don't. You go into building something, with an intention of creating something of value. At least that was. If you go into doing that with any other ambition or outcome, I think you lose the direction of what you're trying to achieve, first and foremost. So I think when you set out, you have the right motivation, because when push comes to shove and times get hard, that motivation is basically what sort of sees you through. So that's kind of maybe answering that question by starting out in the right way with the right people, and with the right intent. All of a sudden, when you find yourself in a position where people are taking interest in your business, one, obviously it's great because it means you're on the right path and you've created something of value. I think it's always important to, consider whether this is the right time, to have a view of the future as to whether you think you can continue to, to sort of build this. And, perhaps whether, everything that you've put in and whether you can actually sort of scale that with the resources you've got, whether they are going to be available to you to, really go and sort of complete that dream. Ultimately, as you scale a business, there are a lot more shareholders that are involved in this. When you start getting investors, especially if it's a venture capital backed business, you have their needs and wants and wishes, to take into account as well. So you really are trying to spin a lot of plates around your team, your co-founders, your investors, your shareholders, which are not necessarily investors, your customers, everyone else. So you're really trying to sort of think what's the best path, and it's sort of removing yourself a little bit away from that and thinking whether, this is the right outcome. I'll be honest, we had a number of conversations over a period of time, with a number of different parties, which was, it was interesting. It was challenging. It was fun, all in equal measure, which really makes you a little bit of a chameleon, in that sort of scenario. I think when it came down to it, I think there were some, specific elements that were important to us, and we realized more than anything that the future was going to be very difficult for us to raise enough capital. And it wasn't just the ability to raise equity, to contribute, to running the business, but also, debt capital specifically in this situation, which is also quite hard to get to. There was a little bit of a waning of some of the buy now, pay later space, or the interest in there. There was a little bit of, heat around, the sort of regulatory stuff. And I think that we realized that to really propel us forward, we needed a bigger partner to kind of help us on that board. Now, whether that's going to be a partnership, whether that's going to be a merger acquisition opportunity or something else, was probably something that we needed to look at. And ultimately, the opportunity with the company that bought us, a company called Shopback, was really the best outcome, for everybody. And really, I think the combination then, as I looked at the business and we talked about collectively around what the future would look like, was a really good fit for the team, the product, everything that we'd created, and it creates something significantly bigger in the future. And that was really the path. I'm not sure there's probably a few, sort of bits of advice in there as you sort of, talk through the story. And of course, it was a much longer journey than that, with plenty of ups and downs along the way. But that was really a lot of the learnings, at least, and the experience of going through that. It's hard. It really is. It's very stressful. There's a lot of negotiation, a lot of people, to play. There's a lot of backwards and forwards, and as always through those those sorts of processes, you have to remain calm, cool, and collected if you can.
As a founder who is going through that experience, or is considering that going through an acquisition, Do you think that they should be looking at multiple potential acquirers? Should those relationships be established a long time in advance, or is that something that you think can be achieved in a relatively short space of time, depending on the conditions?
Yeah, it takes time. I mean, it really does. I think you don't appreciate the work that needs to go through that. You've got, if you really look at the sort of tactical elements, you've got the term sheet, and then you've got the share purchase agreement that you have to run through. You've got all the negotiations that sit with that. You've got the backwards and forwards around, do you agree with this? Do you agree with that? Et cetera, et cetera. There's legal work involved. And of course, then you've got to go through all the due diligence. And there's a hell of a lot, to go through to get to that point. Um, if you've got the resources, perhaps things can be done quickly. But ultimately, if you're a startup, typically you're still trying to run a business at the same time. And it does take a lot of people off their eyes off the business to go and run something, run a process like that. In terms of the relationships, I think it's always important to do that regardless. I mean, right from the very beginning, you're reaching out to everybody to share what you're doing, making those connections, or at least even connect, the people that might have those connections for the future that you can utilize. Because there's always, I think, in the back of your head around, how, if we get into this position, who can we talk to and how can we sort of get out of it? Because the whole journey's one of problem solving, I think, along the way. So I think, advice from that perspective is, I think you have to think about it early. Investors typically will push you to do so anyway, especially if you're getting into the realms of that being an option and of interest. They're looking for a return anyway. Typically, most VCs are in a sort of a particular period of time. So it is really important, I think, to start sort of just preparing those foundations, in place and sort of thinking about that. And then obviously, if you go down that path, you make that decision. I mean, there's often a push and pull element to it. If you want to sell it or someone coming to try and buy you, and then there's the slightly difference of negotiations and processes around that, because the negotiation shoe is on slightly different foot. But it takes a long time. It really does. And just to make sure that you've got enough cash in the bank, I think most importantly to, sort of see it through